Based off of Masechta Bava Basra Daf Kuf Dalid 104, and we're just going to basically review the Mishnah, go quickly through the Gemara. It's not, it's pretty straightforward. A guy says, "Base kur offer ani meichelecha mida bechevel." A guy says, "I'm selling you this called a base kur. Base kur is like 30 saw, a field of 30 saw. If you want to see precisely, it's 273 amas by 273 amas approximately." And he says, "I'm measuring, it has to be exactly. I want to only sell you this exact field, and we're going to measure it out." So Pichas Kalshu, if he gave a little bit less, so then Yanakeh, he has to deduct from the price that the purchaser paid or is going to pay, because he wasn't exact. Hoiser Kalshu, if he added a little bit more to the property, he gave a little bit more. Yachzir, then the seller, the purchaser, has to return back some of the land. He returned back some of the land because they agreed that it's going to be a precise measurement, not more, not less. Vim Omar, if he said, Hein Chose, Hein Yoser, the Mishnah says, if they said, "Oh, well, I'm going to sell you, but more or less a base core," Afila Piches Roiva Lesa, Ahes Roiva Lesa, Higiyoi. Even if he added per saw a Roiva Hakav. So let's just explain. Imagine a field with 30 boxes in it. Each box is a saw. Each saw has 6 kavim. 6 kavim. So when you think about it, and you do the math, so that's 24 quarters of a kav, right? Each kav has 4 quarters, so 24 quarters of a kav. So if he added 1/4 of a kav for a saw, or for 24 quarters, so then it's still higiyoi, the sale is intact and it's fine. I mean, basically it works out to 1 divided by 24, which is 4.1%. So if he added that or made less that's fine, because they said that they're going to be off. They're not going to be exact. Yoiser mekam, but however, if he was off, the seller or the purchaser was off more than a quarter of a kav per saw. So it's, let's say he was off by a little bit more, like 5%. Yasa cheshbon, then they have to work it out to get the money back. So because the seller wants either the land back, or since the land is really so small, he's going to force the purchaser to pay for the extra because he gave him too much. Ma'ihu machzer loy. What does the purchaser return him? Does he return him land, or does he say, "Okay, here's this piece of land, this little piece of land, here's back"? No, mois. The purchaser has to pay extra money for that extra piece of land. Vim rotza, but if the seller says, "You know what, give me the piece of land back, machzolei karka," then you could return the land back. Now, v'lomahu machzolei mois. Why did we say that initially that the purchaser should just give extra money? We're just going to give extra power to the seller. It's up to the seller to decide whether he wants money or whether he wants the land back. Most likely he's going to want money, because if you give him back a little inch by inch land, what's he going to do with it? So therefore, the purchaser has to give extra money because they were off more than normal. But what happens? Shimshir basoda base tisha kabim. If he left, let's say, in a big kura field, 9 kavim. So let's say he really overshot the runway. 9 kavim for, let's see, there's 180 kavim in a 30 saw field, right? Because there's 6 kav in every saw, and there's 30 saw, right? So if you think about that, let's just do the math. Here, the math would be, so if you 9 divided by 180. If he gave him 5% more, okay, exactly 5% more on the entire field, so then it doesn't work. You have to give back the whole piece of land. Ubabigina chatzi kav. If it's a garden, if you overshot by a half a kav, so ukdivra bekiva base roiva, if you overshot by a garden and you gave a roiva kav more, a quarter of a kav more, a half a kav more. So again, if the seller somehow didn't realize he's miscalculating and gave too much land, the purchaser has to return back the land. And really, the seller has to take back that land. I think he will, because with that piece of land, it's not just an inch, it's a couple of feet. And therefore, he'll be able to plant there. And now, we'll explain what this means in the Gemara. Okay, so we said like this. The Gemara says like this, that when do you have to be you have to be 100% correct. If the guy said mida b'chevel, I want it to be exactly 100%. So base kur stoma mau. What happens if they just said, the seller said, I'm selling you a base kur. He didn't say, I'm selling you 100%. He didn't say, I'm measuring it out. He just said, I'm selling you a base kur. Does he have to be precise exactly? So Tashma, come here. We can prove it from our Mishnah. Mishnah says, base kur afani moichelecha mida bechevel. You see this line, mida bechevel, that I'm measuring it out, and it has to be precise. So then you can't be off on that measurement. You have to give exactly, and then otherwise it doesn't work. So pochas kol shehu yenake yasa kol sheyachse. Mishnah says if you're off by a little bit, so then no mechila over here. The purchaser has to pay more, or if he gave less than what he said he was giving, then he has to deduct. Yenake means deduct from the price. So that's only because he said mida bechevel. He said those words, and we're gonna measure it out. We're gonna be exact. Hastama, but if he didn't say that, that's as if he's saying, I'm not going to be, if you just say base core, that means automatically we assume that you're not going to be precise. And then if you're off by the mark, it's okay. You don't have the purchaser and the seller are both moichel each other. So that's a proof from the beginning of the Mishnah, that if you say base core, just base core, you can be off. You don't have to be precise. It's going to be an estimation. If that's the case, Ema Sefer. Let's take a look at the end of the Mishnah. Mishnah in the end seems to say something different. The Mishnah says, "Ve'im amalai." If he said, "Hein chaser ve'hein yaser," I'm going to be off by a mark. Hein chaser hein yaser. I'm giving you a base core, give or take. So then we say, "I feel it pichas roiva l'sar ha'isur roiva l'sar higiyoi." Then everybody's meichel. You don't have to pay for that because you said I'm going to be off. So it's only because you said I'm going to be off, ha stama. But if you didn't say I'm going to be off, kimida bechevel b'dami. That's like saying I want to be precise. So the question still remains from our Mishnah: what's the din? If someone says base kur, does he mean he's going to be precise, or does it mean he's saying base kur more or less a base kur? We don't. He doesn't. He's he could be off a little bit. So you can't deduce anything from our Mishnah, because our Mishnah could go either way. Sometimes from the beginning of the Mishnah, it would seem to imply that stama, without saying anything, it's saying an estimation. And from the Sefer, you could just learn the opposite, that if base kur is, you have to be precise. It's kamida bechevel dami. So let's see another proof. Tashma, come in here. Base kur offer ani moichelecha. If a guy says base kur offer, he says a base kur. He didn't say anything to it, or he said ki base kur offer. I'm selling you approximately a base kur ani moichelecha, or he says hein chosav ein yoser ani moichelecha. I'm selling you more or less a base kur. So he said there's three cases. The first case is he didn't precisely say, well, he just said base kur. So then the Mishnah says even if you're off, you're Michael. I feel a pichas roiva l'sa, even if he gave less, a quarter of a cow for a saw, or haiser roiva l'sa, or you added a roiva, a quarter of a cow for a saw, the sale goes valid, and no one has to give any extra money back or make any deduction. So we see that base kur offer means you don't have to be precise. Only if you say mida bechevel, you have to be precise. Alma stoma, if you just say gebase kur, it's as if you said, I'm not going to be precise. So the Gemara says, maybe not so. Hasam, maybe that case, Perusha kamafarish, Eza hu berks kur, shike base kur, going to amale, hein chosav and yaser. Maybe we were reading the Brisa wrong. Maybe if you, the Brisa is saying like this, base kur Sometimes if you say base core, it as if you're giving approximation, and you don't have to give the base core only if you said hein chaser hein yoser. Like that's the way you read the brisa, and the brisa is just one long case. It's not like three different cases. It's one long case that's explaining that the only time that you don't have to be precise is if you say I'm not going to be precise. So that's how we read the brisa. So you don't have a proof. And says Gemara, Maskef la Ravashi. Ravashi asked, no, that cannot be the shot in the brisa, because in Cain, ani moichelecha, ani moichelecha lamali. Why does the brisa say three times ani moichelecha, ani moichelecha, ani moichel, beis kufa ani moichela, beis ka ani moichela, kenichos ani moichelecha? So it's brisa must be indicating that it's three different cases, and the first case is a stomach case, which has a din like the approximation. Alav shmamino stome. When you say stam, hein chaser, hein yoser, dame shmamino. It's like a hein chaser, hein yoser, and you don't have to be precise. Shmamino, we have our proof. Now, Mishnah said that we go back into the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that if you're off, okay, if you're off by a roiva, let's say a roiva hasa, let's say you're a little bit off, maybe you're a little bit instead of a quarter of a for a kav for a saw, you're off by 28%, or quarter of a kav, let's say 0.30 of a kav, whatever it is. Yasach cheshbon. The Mishnah says there's an in-between case. Then you have to give the money back. So you have to give the money back. And the Mishnah says you give money back. So mahu machsaloi mois. Why? We say that the seller has the power to choose. He can choose if he wants money. He can choose if he wants the little piece of land back. But says the Gemara, that's the shot in the Mishnah. But we don't give any power to the purchaser. The purchaser has to follow the instructions of the seller, how he's going to square off the extra that he got. If that's the case, well, Tanya, we learned in a brisa, which is exactly what we're talking about. If you gave less than 7.5 kavin for a core, basically, if you add up a quarter of 30 saw times a quarter of a kav, that's 7.5 kavin for a 30 saw. Or let's say he over gave 7.5 kavin for a core, so he either gave a little bit land, a little less land than he's supposed to, or he gave a little bit too much land than he's supposed to. Then they're moichel each other. Here's the key: yes or okay, but if he just goes a little bit over that, let's say he gave 8 kavin for the core more, right? Koifit samoicha limkar. We forced the seller to sell that extra piece of land. He can't say, "Give me back 8 kavim of land back." And the lekeach has to give the money. We force the buyer to buy, and he can give money. It's not up to totally. The seller has to sell, and the buyer has to pay more money. So we see that it's up to the buyer to decide if he's going to pay money to the seller. It's not up to the seller if he's going to take karka or money. It's the buyer's choice. And says the Gemara, Hassam, that brisa is a little bit talking about a different scenario. Really, the seller can demand payment, and the seller can demand the money in cash. He could say, I don't want a piece of land. And the buyer, but he could demand the land, and the buyer would not have a right to say, oh, I don't want you in my land. You're going to own a little piece of land within my land. I don't want you around I don't want you around my property. No. If the seller says, I want land, you have to give him land back. But if he wants money back, then there's some power goes to the purchaser. Because what happens, Kagoin, Dahava Yakira Mikara, when the land was sold or given, the price of property, of real estate was expensive. Vizal Hashta. And now it's cheap. And now they realize that the seller gave more property. He gave 8 kavim more than he agreed. So then now the purchaser has to buy it back, has to buy that piece of land. But the seller is demanding, oh, pay me the price that it was 3 months ago when real estate prices were high. And the purchaser says, no, I want to pay you the price of the way it is today. There will give the upper hand to the purchaser. If you're going to give me land, if you were going to give me land, you were going to give me the land like the way it's priced now. That's what I'm going to pay for. The way the land is priced now, not the way the land was priced when we originally made the contract. So in some areas, we do give the power to the purchaser. Once the seller decides that he overpaid, that he gave too much land, the seller can say, oh, give me a piece of land back. But usually he's not going to say that. He's going to say, give me money. You could keep that extra small piece of land because there's nothing what I can do with it. The purchaser will pay him the value of the land at the time that they realize their mistake. He doesn't have to pay the value of the land the way it was at the time of the sale because then we give a little power to the purchaser. Says the Gemara, are we going to give you the power of the way it's being sold right now? Well, Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, you give him the way the price is right now, the way it was when you priced it out, when he purchased it, when the contract was made. You're just telling me that you always set the price for the extra for the way the price is today. And here, this price says you set the price at the time that you made the original contract. What is it? And says the Gemara Hossam, that price is talking about, you're going to have a Zulim Yikara. It was cheap from the very beginning. Yakar Lahashta, now it's expensive. So it's the opposite case. So then when the purchaser has to buy it back, he doesn't pay today's prices. He pays the prices when the original contract was made. So for the extra, let's say 8 kavim that he wants to buy back, he'll pay the price the price of 8 kavim the way it was when they signed the original contract. Now, the Mishnah says like this: what happens instead of overshooting by 8 kavim? Let's say the seller accidentally gave 9 kavim more to this 30 saw land. So then the sale is off, right? The sale is off. That's what the Mishnah says. Yes, al-K. Based then, he has to return that land. There's no sale on that land. The purchaser has to give back that land, no questions asked. So the question is, what happens if he sold him more than 1 kur? Is Omar Rav Huna said, Tes kavim shamru, if he overshot by 10 kavim, afilu bebika gdoila, even if he sold a lot of different, even if he sold a big plot of land that's more than 30 saw. Let's say he sold 30 saws. Let's say he sold 300 saw of land. If he just gave 10 kavim more, which is the size of a little field, a mini field, the purchaser cannot keep that. He has to give it back to the seller. And there's no, negotiation saying, oh, I want to keep it. I'm going to give you money. But Rav Nachman says, no, I feel it. Nice and ship is a kavim back to the whole kur v'kor. This 10 kavim is for every kur. Every kur, every 300, every 30 saw that you're getting, you have a right to overshoot by 7.5 kav, right? 7.5 kav. So for every kur, so let's say you bought 10 kurs, so you can overshoot by 7.5 times 10, because each kur gets a 7.5. Even though the total of all that will be more than 9 kavim, but for every kur, 7.5 kav is enough. It is enough, and still the sale will not be invalidated, and the purchaser can buy it if he wants to. We don't have to. He doesn't have to return it back. Says the Gemara, "Vafilu." We go on the base, "Va'iki milsi yisera l'tisha kabim hadri." If it's more than a little bit of a roiva for a saw, let's say it's more than that. The way 7.5 kav work is because it's a quarter of a kav per every saw in that 30 saw stretch. But if there's more than that, it's more than a roiva per kav, then there's no mechila at all, and then then everything goes back, and therefore you have to return that piece of land. Okay, so now. So the question is, bottom line is it an absolute number, 9 kavim, or is it an absolute number no matter how much you purchase, or is it's not an absolute number? 9 kavim is said by every 30 saw that you buy. Rav Huna says it's an absolute number. No matter how much you're buying, if you overshoot by 9 kavim, the purchaser has to return it. And Rav Huna said, and Rav Nachman said, no, 9 kavim is for every 30 saw. So Rav asked Rav Nachman, we learned if you left in the field, base tisha kavim. If you left over 9 kavim, the sale is off. The purchaser has to return it. So what do you see from here? Lav, isn't this talking about the lav the zabim le karayim, that the guy bought 2 kurs, and nevertheless, since he overshot by 9 kavim, so that's what you think our mission is talking about. You bought 2 kurs and you overshot by 9 kavim, the sale is off. That extra piece has to be returned. That indicates that the 9 kavim is an absolute number, no matter how many kurs you're buying. Once you're off by 9 kav, that 9 kav goes back. Answers the Gemara. So this is a question against Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says it's not the 9 kav. The key is 7.5 kav or 8 kavs per kur. So you could technically be overshoot by, if you're buying 10 kurs or 2 kurs, you could overshoot by 6, 7.5 to 7.5, 15. And the sale is not off. You don't have to return that. You just pay for it. So that's so the Mishnah seems to be against Rav Nachman. The Mishnah says that if you overshoot by 9 kavim, the sale is off. Answers the Gemara, lo, you're misreading our Mishnah. The Zabale Bekur. Our Mishnah actually is talking about you're only buying 1 kur. Our Mishnah is not talking about you're buying one big field with a lot of kurs. You're buying exactly this amount called a kur. Says the Gemara, Uvagina Beis Chatzi Kav. So the Mishnah says, again, you can ask the same question on the Mishnah against Rav Nachman. Mishnah says by a garden, you have to be off by Chatzi Kav, then the sale has to be returned. Lav de Zabin Leisasayim. Isn't that an indication that you purchased 2 saw, and still Chatzi Kav is the symbol of you have to return it, even though you bought 2 saws. So we see it's an absolute number, because according to Rav Nachman understanding, it's Chatzi Kav per every saw when you're dealing with gardens. And says the Gemara, Loi, our Mishnah is not talking about that. The Zabale saw. Our Mishnah is talking about you're buying 1 saw, and therefore Chatzi Kav for 1 saw. That's when the sale, that part of the sale has to be returned to the seller, but not that you're buying 2 saws. The same question. Rab Kiva says the sale would be considered, that extra piece would have to be returned if you're off by 1/4 of a kav. My love, the Zabale saw that you bought 1 saw. According to Rabbi Akiva, if you bought the sale would be off if you bought it's roiva of per every half a saw. The way because it's the way Rav the way Rav Huna understands it, it's roiva no matter what you're buying. Once you're off by a roiva, the sale would have to be refunded, give it back to the seller. But according to Rav Nachman, it's base roiva for every half a saw. And here the Mishnah says that even if you bought a saw, base roiva would invalidate that part of the sale. And so the Gemara, you can say our Mishnah is talking about Zabale Chatzi saw, that you purchased a half a saw. Okay, one more minute. By Ravashi. Ravashi has the question. Soda v'nasa gina v'nasa soda mai teku. That we say there's different measurements for a gina, and there's different measurements for a soda. So if a soda became a gina, where now the sale has to be returned, or a gina became a soda, where now, according to the measurement of the overshot, you could actually work out the seller, the purchaser, can actually pay for that land. So again, when you sold it, it was a certain place, but then it became the nature of the field changed. You decided to change it from wheat to growing a vegetable, from a wheat, then you're changing it to growing fruits or something like that, or a fruit field, you changed it into a field tree. Mao, how do you treat that? Teku. Tana, we learned in the Bryson. Wow, a Bryson says that this whole business, if the seller sold a field far away from him, but if he sold a field right next to him, and that he gave a little extra, that little extra piece is near his field, the purchaser has to give him back the land. If between the field that the seller has and the purchaser has. There's a pit there, or there's a canal there, or there's a little a bike path there, or let's say there's a bunch of trees there. Is that so? And then the seller gave him a little extra piece of land. Since there's a separation, maybe the purchaser can keep that land. So or not. Maybe since it's still close enough to his field, he has to return it to the seller. Teku, the Gemara leaves that unresolved. And then the final thing is the way you read the Mishnah is like this: that if you really overshot, let's say you overshot you could overshoot by 7.5 kav, but let's say you gave 9.5 kav or 10 kavs extra. So then everything goes back. Tanu Rav Nachman, not only the extra you gave back from 7.5 to 10, all the extra, all the quarter of a calves, everything goes back. Because once you made a big mistake, then there's no mechila on any part of it. So everything has to go back to the seller, and there's no mechila by the seller. Okay, we'll continue Be'ez Hashem tomorrow with the